right. Welcome back. I'm Gila Ross, author of Living Beautifully and host of the Power Up podcast, where we share short, relatable ideas to impact and upgrade your everyday life.
Welcome back, everyone. We're going to look at empathy, and we're going to look at it from a different kind of perspective. Let me ask the question of what stands in the way of us being empathetic towards other people?
Frustration.
Okay. Anything else?
Judgment.
Tell me more about that.
Just not really thinking of, not putting yourselves in their shoes, but assuming that you know the backstory.
Okay. Assuming we know the backstory. The truth is, like, if we kind of boil down like the frustration and the preconceived ideas and the judgment, it's all very much based on an assumption. And the assumption that I think we have is that they could have chosen to do better. Am I correct in that? Let me give you an example. You know, you ask someone to pick up some milk for you from the supermarket, or you ask someone to take the trash out, and they don't do it. What's the source of the frustration? So now there's a judgment that they weren't listening.
Or that they didn't care enough to do it.
They didn't care enough. And again, what's the underlying thing? Imagine if you found out, wild story. They were on the way to take out the trash and they got arrested by the police. Are you still frustrated? Why not?
Because they have a legitimate reason for not doing it.
Which is another kind of way of saying is that we feel like they didn't really have a choice there. The choice was taken away. So I think a lot of what underlies this is of the frustration and the judgment is that you could have done better. Does that sound like sense? So what I want to look at today is free will. Let's look at choices. And let's try and understand that, because I think that will give us a much better window into other people's choices and our own choices as well.
Free will is actually a very interesting conversation. It's actually
Yes.
very fascinating. When you think about free will, it's, yes, God has given us stuff, but He's also giving us the choice to do something if we want to or not.
You're 100% right. It is a fascinating concept, and let's try and understand it. What do you think the Jewish view on free will is? What's your opinion on free will? As human beings, do we have free will?
I think in some sense, yes,
Okay.
we have some type of free will.
Because what I really want to kind of understand, get to grips to understand is, I'm hearing this undercurrent of, yes, we have free choice, but do we have free choice in every area? The first thing that we have to understand is that when we talk about free choice in Judaism, we're talking about free choice in areas of morality. Do you have the choice of what color socks to wear in the morning? Yes, you do. Generally, it's not a moral choice. No one really cares. You choose the pink socks, you choose the yellow socks, unless you're gonna scream at someone for taking your yellow socks or whatever. In general, we're talking about moral free choices. Same thing. Can you choose what flavor ice cream you want? Yeah, you can. Usually, it's not a moral free choice. So firstly, we're talking about in areas of morality. The second thing is that there is a lot of things that are outside of our area of free choice. A lot of times, whether people have kids or not, right? Wealth could be outside of your areas of free choice. Talents, strengths, weaknesses, a lot of times can be outside of your areas of free will. Whether you get a job or not can be outside of your areas of free will. The family you get born into, massive impact on your life. Do we have choice in that?
No.
No, we do not have choice in that. Now, how free are we? But I want to throw out a different example. You know, let's say there is a kid that grows up in an abusive home, very abusive home, and they grow up to become a criminal. Does that kid have free choice or not?
Not really.
I think it's harder, but I think they do have choices that they make.
Do they have the same choices as someone who grows up in a healthy, loving home?
Probably
The same.
not.
Look at gangs. if you want to survive in the tenements or the projects,
Yeah.
you have to join a gang. You don't have a choice if you want to.
Survive.
This, I think, is the complexity of free will, is that we do have free will, right? We do have free will in how we do it, but our free will is not all the same. Because there's an idea that Rav Dessler talks about, which is called the point of free will. Anything above the point of free will is too hard for us, and it's outside of our free will. Anything below the point of free will is too easy for us. It's not our free will either. Anyone drove this morning? You passed a red light? Did you stop?
Yes.
Was that a free choice for her?
Yeah, I don't want to kill someone.
So I don't know you, and I might be a thing, but I'm going to suggest for most of us, stopping at a red light is not a real free choice. Because when you're coming up to the red light, maybe the orange light is, right? Mm-hmm. But when you're coming up to the red, you're not actually thinking to yourself, should I stop? Should I not stop? Was that what was going through your head? I'll give a more extreme example, right? You walk past a bank. Do you have to, and you don't have to share if this is your struggle, right? But do you have to fight with yourself, should I go in and rob that bank?
Yeah.
So that is a free choice that is too easy, right? Now there's different aspects of it. In Judaism, we have two different things. When we do a mitzvah or when we do a negative thing, again, we're talking about areas of morality. In areas of morality, nothing's neutral. It's either a positive or it's a negative. When we do a positive thing, for example, you walk past the bank and you do not steal, or you refrain from doing negative things, two things happen. There's a benefit that comes from it, and there's a reward that you get. For example, let's say you tell the truth. There's a benefit that becomes, which is you become a little bit more of a truthful person. You contribute to society being a little bit more truthful. There's also a reward for doing that mitzvah. The benefit is the same regardless. The reward, though, is dependent on the effort that you make. Let's say you have someone who is a serial bank robber, and he or she walks past the bank, and for her, it's struggle. Do I rob this bank this morning? Even if, let's say, she has a ski mask in her bag, right? And she has the gun or whatever she needs to do it. She's got all the opportunities there, and she's struggling. Do I? Don't I? Do I? Don't I? Is that a free choice struggle for her? Absolutely. That is a free choice struggle for her. And if she chooses not to rob the bank, her rewards and the person, I'll use myself as an example, and my reward for not robbing the bank are completely different. My rewards for not robbing the bank is going to be minimal. Why? Because it's not a struggle for me. If it's a struggle for you to stop at the red light, then your reward is much greater. If it's not a struggle for you, then you don't really get that much of a reward. The benefit is always the same. The benefit of the action that you do, the consequence, if you want to talk about it, of the action that you do is always the same. The reward that we get is dependent on how difficult that struggle is. So we have things that are too easy for us. Those are not really areas of free will struggle. You walk past an old lady and you don't mug her. For most of us, that's not a free choice. Because it's so abhorrent to us that it's not something we struggle with, for most of us. We'll talk about where your areas of free will come in a second. Now, there are things that are so hard for us that they're also not a free choice struggle. For example, you have someone who is debating whether the thing that they're going to say is considered a waste of words or not. Most of us are not holding there. Right? There's a concept in Judaism about being careful with your words, and not just talking bad about other people, but talking nonsense, like talking meaningless conversations. Most of us are not holding there, right? So when it comes to just having meaningless conversations, and again, I'm not going into the concept of what it means because it's not the scope of the conversation. I just want to try and bring something that I think is beyond the scope of everyone in this room. And if I'm offending anyone because this is your current struggle, apologies, that's not my intent. So when we say things that could be considered a waste of words, or if we waste our time, you're sitting and you don't need to relax, you're just wasting time. Is that a free choice struggle for most of us? Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't, right? Because sometimes it doesn't even occur to us that we should be doing better, we should be doing different. So where is the free will? it's called the point of free will, and it's where we struggle. Do I, don't I, do I, don't I? And if you want to give an analogy of it, it's kind of like when two countries are at war. Both countries are at war, but where is the war actually fought? It's on the front lines. And the front lines change. The more one side wins, the front line may move. And that's the way. In Battle of Free Will, the good choice versus the bad choice. The good and the bad part of us are always at war with each other. But where do we feel it? It's those areas where we kind of think to ourselves, should I stop at the red light or should I not? Should I tell the truth or should I not?
Is that kind of like, if it's in your consciousness, then it is, or if you don't even think about it, then it's
100% right. That if it's in your consciousness, that's your point of free will. Right? If you are driving, if you are stopping at the red light without thinking about it, that's not a free will choice. That's a habit already. If you are driving through the red light without even thinking about it, again, that's not a free will choice. That's too hard for you at this point. Right? Whatever it is. Now we'll talk about how our free will choice gets in it. But I'll give you another two examples, right? You have someone who's in the habit of mugging old ladies. Their point of free will may not be, do I mug this old lady on this Tuesday morning? It may be, do I mug this old lady with more or less violence? That might be their area of free will. For the average person, that's not their area of free will. Like it's nauseous to think about doing something like that. You have someone who, again, is highly spiritually developed. Their area of free will may be how I talk about people. So the area of free will is very much dependent on the person. Now, how does the area of free will develop? Why is it that some people struggle with robbing banks and some people struggle with talking badly about other people?
Part of it could be your upbringing, like you said.
Part of it is absolutely things out of our control. It could be your personality. It could be the way you were brought up. You know, we can't compare a child who is brought up with in a loving home to someone who's brought up in an abusive home. You can't compare the two. They have different struggles. I also want to point out that there are some things, like kids don't have moral free choices the same way that adults do, right? There are some psychiatric conditions or health conditions that a person can have that will also limit a person's free choices. What we're starting to see is that free will is very complicated, right? And the point of free will is very complicated. And I'm going to throw one more thing in that complicates it even further, and that is that our choices impact our free will, our point of free will. I'll give you an example. Let's just say you have a lady, let's call her Jane. She goes to a class, she learns about kosher. She's never kept kosher in her life before, but she's intrigued by the idea. She hears about it. She's like, you know what? I want to start keeping kosher. And what does she do? The next day, she's in her office. Let's just say she lives in New York City, right? And she comes out of her office, time to buy lunch, and she has a choice. She can either go to her favorite deli, which is not kosher, or she can go to a kosher deli and buy a kosher lunch. She lives in New York City, so there's a plethora of kosher places nearby. How hard is it at that point to choose to go and buy a kosher lunch?
Depends how long she's been doing it.
First day, very first day that she's deciding to do. Extremely hard. It's extremely hard. I mean, this is her lunch. It's her habit. It's what she likes. She doesn't know if she's going to like the food in the other place, right? Like, it's very, very, very hard. Let's just say she wins and she buys the kosher lunch. Day number 2. How hard is it? She has the same choice, right? Again, she's grappling. I need to buy a lunch. Do I go and buy a kosher lunch or do I go and buy a non-kosher lunch? All right, and it could be, you know, you could substitute at something else. It could be, do I buy the kosher meat or the non-kosher meat? The kosher meat's more expensive. Which one do I buy? Day 2, how hard is it?
Still hard.
Yes, tiny bit less, maybe, right? Depends on how much you enjoyed the lunch yesterday. Still really, 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 really hard, right? Let's say she manages to do it 7 days in a row. Day 8, how hard is it for her?
Still hard, but getting easier.
Still hard, but getting easier. Let's say she manages to do it for 90 days in a row, 3 months. Easier.
Starting to get more easier.
What's going to happen at some point is it's going to turn into a habit. Her area of her point of free will move. Can you see how it moves? It moves from it not even being a choice. Eating a kosher lunch wasn't even a choice because it wasn't something she thought about or knew about. It wasn't like before that first day. Maybe she grappled with it, but let's make it easy. Let's assume let's give this mythical character this like mythical ability to get it right every single time, right? Which doesn't happen. But before she actually started thinking about it, it was below. It was too easy for her. Then it became the point of free will because it was a struggle for her, and maybe some days she won and some days she lost. And the more she won, eventually it gets to a point where it's no longer a free choice. Right? So where's her free choice at this point? Has she conquered it? She's all good now?
I think there's still going to be that struggle inside, but
It's going to be in a different area.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever experienced it? That something that you've struggled with has then no longer become a struggle?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And
I have a question. Are you saying that's not free will because
it may or may not be.
like me, I mean I gave up pork also, but I'm not kosher but I still feel guilty about it, and I feel like it is a free choice, but I haven't decided I'm going to go kosher.
So that guilt is a little bit of a clue that it's perhaps within your free choice, right? For someone who doesn't have guilt about it at all, that's definitely. But I'm going somewhere with this, right? With this class, so follow along. But the fact that you have a little bit of guilt. Now, what happens? Going back to that, thank you for sharing that, and I can relate to it. There are things I can't think of something right now off the top of my head but a struggle that for other people may be like, oh, what's the big deal? But like when you're changing something and the reason why it's a struggle is because it becomes a moral choice, right? And, you know, what often sometimes happens is we conquer a free will choice. And then what happens is our struggles and our challenges become harder. Why? Why do they become harder?
Once you conquer it,
Yes, your challenge becomes you conquer the let's use the pork, right? It's not like, okay, now I'm good, I don't have any more will choices. You will gonna have maybe your free will choice then becomes, do I bring a little bit more Shabbat into my home? And it's harder then, right? Because it's much more of a disruption than the occasional thing, right? Why is it that it gets harder? And I'll give you an analogy of why it gets harder. Then I'll explain the deeper reality of why it gets harder. Is imagine you have a kid who's playing in soccer, and they're great. What happens when they get a certain point is they outgrow the league and they move on to the next league, right? Let's keep it simple, right? Why does it become? Because you can't have a higher level league playing in the lower level because he's not going to get challenged, right? Why? So he has to move up because that's how he maintains his challenge, or she maintains the challenge, and also the game, right? Like imagine if you're a tennis player and you're playing against little kids, like it's not fun, it's not real. Now, on the deeper level, what's happening is that we kind of think like we have a good and we have a bad side. There's one us, right? And the one us is pitched against sometimes to the good and sometimes to the bad, right? And it's like anything in life, right? Nothing in life is either good or bad. It's less or more power. So as we exercise our free choice, we become more or less powerful. The more good choices we make, the more powerful we become, right? And the more powerful we become, the more challenging our choices are going to become, because we are graduating out of the little league and into the big league, right? The more bad choices we make, the weaker we become. I'll give you a silly example, right? Let's say you're in a habit of going to the gym 3 times a week. You fall off for 2 weeks, you don't go to the gym. How hard is it to get back? So hard. Why? Why is it hard? Because of our free will choices, we've dropped, and it becomes harder to climb back up, right? So what you're seeing so far here is that our free will is pitched at the point of our free will, which is individual for every single person in the world. Our point of free will changes dependent on the choices that we make. And our point of free will is sometimes in areas outside of our control. We can have free will in certain areas, could be completely out of control. I'll give you an example, right? This, I believe, is a true story. There was once a woman who was arrested for shoplifting. She came from a very wealthy family, very comfortable family, and she was arrested for shoplifting candy from a store. She goes to court, and her defense lawyer says, look, this woman has kleptomania. This is a psychiatric condition outside of her control. It's not her fault. What would you say? And again, I do not know anything about kleptomania, so I'm not going to say, but she has a psychiatric condition, which means that she has a different struggle than someone who does not have it. For most people, if they can afford candy and they walk into a store, they do not have a free choice to not steal candy. When they walk out the store with paying for their candy, they don't get to pat themselves on the back and say, wow, I'm a hero for not stealing candy. Because it wasn't a struggle for them at some point, right? This woman who has kleptomania, she has an area of free will struggle that other people don't, and that could be completely outside of her control. But you have that struggle. You have an awareness that you have that struggle. You have a responsibility to try and fight, right? And it could mean she needs to go for professional help. It could mean that she has to put a boundary in place and say that I cannot go into a store with myself. And again, I don't know what the professional intervention would be for someone who has kleptomania. But what we're identifying here is that the area of free struggle can sometimes be outside of our control. Sometimes it's because of our bad choices that we've made in the past. However, we have free choice in how we respond to that, which doesn't mean, right, make it a little bit more complicated, we're always going to be successful. That's not life. That's not how God made us. He made us human, which means that our job is to struggle. Sometimes we'll win, sometimes we'll learn. We don't fail. We win or learn in life. But what this is kind of showing us is that the point of free will can sometimes be outside of our control. And yet we have the choice of how we respond to that struggle. What does this tell us about empathy? Empathy for ourselves and empathy for others. Knowing the complexity of free will, what does it tell us?
We don't know what other people's struggles are.
We don't know, right? You go back to this inner city kid, right, who grew up in the most abusive and dysfunctional home and mugs an old lady. It could be, in God's eyes, that was a success. Why? Because they wanted to really mug that old lady with more violence. And they struggled and they struggled and they struggled and they did it with less violence. I'm giving an extreme example, but we don't know. Now, what does empathy mean? Empathy means that I don't know what this person's struggle is. I don't know whether this is a success or a failure for them. And at the same time, we have free choice. It could be this person is a failure. But it's not for me to make that judgment call on the other person just because I don't have all the information, right? If you were the judge or the jury in that case, you'd have to say, I'm really sorry, I just don't have that information, right? Same thing with the kleptomania. It could be, this is her first time, right? She never knew she had the struggle. So it's not a failure on her part. It could be she was told and she agreed not to go in to a store unsupervised, right? Or not to go into this particular store. And she failed not by stealing the candy, but she failed by going into the store. So we don't know what other people's struggles are. That can help us have empathy for other people. What about empathy for ourselves?
Think to yourself, because that's hard. We can do everything for everybody else.
That is absolutely true. And how does understanding free will help us have empathy for ourselves? And someone wrote here that empathy can be a double-edged sword. And it can be. And empathy can be mistaken for a lack of empathy, a lack of accountability for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the important things to know for ourselves is that we can get so hung up on like where my free choice is right now, right? We don't know. It could be that where we are right now is because I made choices in the past that were outside of my areas of free will, right? Let's take this, the example I hope we can all relate to, of the woman who, or man, whoever it is, that has not been to the gym for 2 weeks, right? Struggling to get back. That person can be in that space of thinking like, oh, if only I would have gone to the gym, I wouldn't be here right now. It could be that that person didn't go to the gym because they had an injury and it was outside of their control. And it could be they didn't go to the gym just because the first day they made a choice not to go, and then it became a little bit easier to make the choice not to go, and now they're in that situation. And if you know for sure where you are, great, learn from it. A lot of times we don't know for sure. We're not so good at judging ourselves either, to be honest, right? What we can do though is recognize this is where I am right now. What is the next best choice that I can make, right? And that's, I think, the balance of empathy for ourselves with accountability, right? I don't know. Maybe I do, right? And if I can learn to, again, and if you know what it is, the whole point of knowing what it is just to learn how to do better in future, right? If you have to fix something with someone, absolutely you have to do that. When we do the, when we look at how people change and forgiveness and all that, we'll look at that later. But the idea right now is that if someone is beating themselves up for where their area of free choice is right now, that's usually not helpful. No. And what the thing is I don't know, it could be that you're here right now because of choices that you made in the past that you shouldn't have made. And we all do that, right? Mm-hmm. And what is the next best choice that I can make for myself right now?
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I'd love to hear your feedback, and if you enjoyed this episode, you'll love my book, Living Beautifully: How to Bring Meaning, Joy and Love into Your Life, based on the timeless wisdom of Pirkei Avot. And please take a moment to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out. Have a wonderful day.